Did you get the story that the US is like the best country in the world? Because I sure as hell did, and a lot of Latinos do. And, I was interviewing one of our clients a couple days ago, and she said this interesting thing where it depends on where you are on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Hmm.
That if, for example, you're from another country and you don't have very much and you're trying to establish yourself, the US and Western Europe and Canada and Australia look fantastic to
Of
you,
course.
which is the view that our parents probably had because they came from dire situations in other countries. And we want to be respectful of that. I get it. I get the mentality. I understand why that's important. But then again, as our client brought up, if you're higher up on that hierarchy of needs, the West is not looking very good for you right now.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Expat, where we believe in building freedom through entrepreneurship, adventure, and connection. I'm Justin Keltner, and I'm an entrepreneur that's been living overseas for the greater part of the last decade. On this podcast, we're on a mission to connect entrepreneur expats and aspiring expats together to create a global community of freedom seekers. Each week, we'll feature new episodes about living overseas as an expat, as well as tips to grow your business. We also interview 6- and 7-figure expats and other experts to inspire you, educate you, and connect you to this big wide world. It's great to have you along the journey.
Okay, so let's go a little bit into your story, Justin, and how you decided to become an expat. Because last time we talked about my story because it's a lot more recent, but this is a newer life for me. This is a newer thing, even though I've been thinking about it for a decade. I didn't pull the trigger until recently. You, on the other hand, have spent, I don't know, the better part of the last decade living in other countries, in particular Latin America. So I would love to dive into your story on why you decided to make that move because it's almost like you were on this trend early. Like
Mm.
now we see a lot of Americans doing it, but you were noticing some of the things that Americans are concerned about 6 or 7 years ago. So what prompted you to make a move? Because you didn't even speak Spanish. I mean, you were literally going into completely different culture, completely different language, completely different way of living. What prompted that?
So I think for a really long time, I had a lot of curiosity about Latin America. Um, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't at least in part from, watching different movies and series on Netflix about about certain conflicts in Colombia and Mexico and other countries that we won't get into too much detail about. But just seeing like how different um, the places and the architecture and the people and kind of having that sense of adventure to want to explore. I think things like that actually. So um, watching those series. Narcos for sure is one of them, even though that's definitely not quite,
Such a typical gringo.
actually, I didn't even want to say it,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was one for sure where I'm like, huh, what's going on in this Colombia place? Is it really as crazy as they say? No, it's absolutely not. Colombia is actually very beautiful, safe, um, very. I love the people and the culture in Colombia. I actually lived in Medellin for 3 years, but we'll get into that. So yeah, watching things like that, getting kind of that initial spark. And actually, I had lived in Mexico for a couple of years on and off when I was still a teenager. This was actually my uncle and his family down in Tijuana because he was living down there, and I'd been traveling with him when I was, you know, 14, 15 years old. Just kind of already starting to explore the world. So I had lived in Mexico for a little while on and off while traveling between there and Southern California. I'd seen a bunch of series, a bunch of movies about Latin America. I had, it's actually interesting. I dated a Colombian girl when I was living in Las Vegas for a little while, and I had planned a trip down there but both to go see her because she was going back at some point to Colombia, and also just to really explore and see what it was like there because I'd always had this sense of adventure. And so this was back in, I want to say like spring of 2018. So we're in 2023 now. So yeah, around 5 years ago. a little 5.5 years ago or so was when I'd first really taken my first trip to like real Latin America. I guess, you know, the border towns are kind of Mexico, but in a big sense, they're just an extension of the US because
Right.
it's not.
Most, to your point,
Yeah.
most Americans and Canadians, which is the wide part of our audience, they go to like Cancun and think they're in Mexico, or they go to Puerto Vallarta and they think they're in Mexico,
Or
or
Tijuana. Or they
Tijuana,
go to Rosarito Beach
and
for a
it's not
day. Yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, it
It
is.
is. It is.
No,
Yeah.
it's Gringolandia.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so I'd taken a trip there, and I first actually ended up in Bogota. Well, Bogota is how they pronounce it there. I guess Bogota to us gringos. And so I was in Bogota, I was in Medellin, and I think I'd also went to Cartagena. That was the first trip to Colombia. So I was in Colombia total for 2 weeks. And actually, I traveled around a lot there. It's a lot to see in just a couple weeks. And so just really getting the sense for what life was like. Dating was definitely a completely different picture there. Granted, being an American in South America certainly has its advantages. Perhaps not today as much as it did.
Well, that's an episode for another
Yeah.
time because there is a trend of like American men going overseas and finding their wives. But
Oh, like the passport bros?
yeah, that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah.
You lived a little bit of that passport bro life before it was a thing.
I wouldn't say that I'm a pioneer. Um, but yeah, it was like just the way, I mean, and that was certainly a part of it. Just the way that women look at you. It's you just can't compare it. But it's not just being a gringo and having that advantage on the playing field there. It's also it's just the way, and you know this. I mean, in Miami, I guess there almost isn't as much of a contrast compared to the rest of America because there's a lot of Latinos in South Florida, but compared to, let's say, California, it's such a stark contrast because the women in Latin America, for the most part, they're just so. I hate to say, I'm going to offend a lot of people on this one. We're gonna light the internet on fire a little bit, but um, the women in Latin America and Eastern Europe, they're so feminine. They're so, and you count because you're a Latina, so you're grandfathered into the club here, but they're so feminine, they're so nice, they're so respectful. There's more of the like traditional family values than you get perhaps in the States, especially in a lot of the, I hate to say it, but a lot of like the blue cities and states, right? The coastal cities, California and New York and um a lot of different places. So it's this stark contrast, this difference. Also, just how everybody communicates there. You feel like, oh, you actually have neighbors. You have people in your community that you talk to. I think I told the story on another podcast, but uh, after being in Colombia for about 2 years, I went back to LA and I was I think I was in like West Hollywood in an elevator somewhere. And in Latin America, you're used to saying buenos dias to everyone. ¿Cómo estás? How are you doing? I said,
People smile at you
people smile at you
in
and
Latin
say, say
America.
buenos dias back.
I mean, I met one of our neighbors yesterday doing that because I took Daisy out to go potty.
Daisies are dragon slash
Daisy,
golden retriever.
yeah, I took Daisy out to go potty, and Daisy, I guess, saw one of the neighbors. I guess she'd met them already. I hadn't met them yet. And it was our neighbor a few doors down and her daughter, who must have been 5 years old. The daughter, and she's like, oh, welcome to the neighborhood if you need anything. I'm like 3 doors down, such a pleasure to meet you, things like that. And I was like, holy shit, when was the last time somebody told me that in the US? Like,
Yeah.
or like I smile at people in the US and they look at me like I'm crazy
Well, I went into the elevator
sometimes.
there and I said good morning to everyone and they're in LA and not a single person said good morning or hello back. They were just looking at me like I was insane,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And I was like, "Okay, I shouldn't do that. We're not allowed to do that in the States, right?"
yeah.
But how crazy is that? So anyway, there's little things like that where you just feel part of a community. You feel, um, like people actually have an interest in getting to know you.
So, but did you already know previous to moving to
No, no, but
Colombia?
that was my experience
Oh,
just in the few weeks that I was there at the
okay.
beginning when I took a trip in I think it was in April of 2018 when I had been actually so I was in the middle of a move. No, this is before I'd moved to Austin, but I took a trip to Colombia in early 2018. Yeah, just for 2 weeks, and I had already experienced that. A lot of the differences that the cost of living, of course, is a huge factor now. Medellin is significantly more expensive than it was 5 years ago. I mean, like double or triple, but it is what it is. That's just what happens. There's a lot of inflation and also a lot of Americans, especially after the pandemic, moving to Latin America. So you're right in that I was one of the not the first people, but before it like really became cool, before everybody had remote jobs that they could do from anywhere. But it was just a different experience. It was a different pace of life. The food was much better. The Nothing like Mexico that you can't even compare. I mean, Mexican food gonna probably ruffle
Common.
some feathers here, but
It's always
Mexican food is a lot better than
maybe
Colombian food.
Peru though. Like I've heard Lima, Peru specifically is like a foodie town, like
Mhm.
a foodie city. So it's on my list. But
Yeah, I mean, Colombia has its thing, but like to me, the actual like native Colombian food, it was interesting to try, but I wouldn't eat it every day, kind of thing. But still, like they have a lot of international cuisine in Colombia, just like they do here. But
so
it was great. It was
so
eye
you
opening.
so you took a trip to Colombia, right? It opened your eyes to a different, basically out of curiosity, a girl, right?
Yeah.
And it opened your eyes to a different way of living. So you went back to the United States after that, or did you like, were you basically like, okay, I'm staying in Colombia?
So I actually did go back to the U.S. because I wasn't actually quite ready to pull the trigger, and it was really just a vacation. And I was in the process of actually moving uh, to Austin.
Mhm.
So I had ended up moving to Austin from the West Coast. I was in California before that, and then uh, I was in Vegas, and I had moved to Austin. I just moved there. Wasn't even in Austin for 2 months. This was going into the summer, like May and June, and it was hot as hell there. It was scorching. I didn't have I didn't have like covered parking, so my car was just outside, and it was 120-degree heat.
And you were like, take me back to Colombia.
Oh my goodness, you couldn't even open the handle of your door. I had to, like, grab my shirt and then use that to open the door handle. It was so scorching inside, you burn your it was no. Anyway, Austin was not the greatest in the summer. So I was there and I remember distinctly, you know, I was making okay money at the time, not as much, perhaps as now getting back into business these last several years, like really for myself and us together. But I couldn't even really afford to live there. I mean, I was renting a room in a house. I was eating like at best maybe like, not street tacos, but like food truck tacos
Yeah.
just to get by, and cooking occasionally. But yeah, I would like eat at a food truck, and I distinctly remember it was 2 tacos and a Gatorade kinda thing, and it came out to, like, 19 or $20. And I said, "Why am I doing this? I can go back to Mexico, I can go back to Colombia, I can go somewhere else, and this would be, like, 2 bucks."
Yeah.
This just doesn't make any sense, and it wasn't even good. It wasn't
Yeah.
even good food.
Yeah.
So I said, and I think that's, my situation with my roomie there had also been winding down, and I said, "You know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna go back to Colombia." And it's funny how this happened. It's funny how this happened, like, just within a week, I had bought a one-way ticket to Medellin, got a storage and put all my oh, we got these reactions going off again. This So within 2 weeks, I had got a storage shed for all my stuff, put my car into storage, put all of my stuff from that house into storage, and with my dog and everything. She's a registered service dog, so she was able to travel with me and got all the paperwork from her. That was probably the hardest part, and just flew straight to Colombia. And I was there for basically over a year straight before I came back and like finally unpacked my things and sold everything and got out of there because I was paying a lot of money for just keeping my car and everything in the US for no reason. But yeah, I just made the leap and I said, you know what? I'm gonna move to Colombia. I'm gonna figure it out. Didn't speak a lick of Spanish, like nothing. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Like that was about it. Taco, burrito.
And now he's, like, fluent. My
Yeah.
mother was quite impressed. She thought that you took, like, professional lessons or something like that, and he basically was like, "Nope, I just learned by living in Colombia and listening to Juanes,
Yeah.
and watching TV in Colombia."
Pretty
Yeah, he just you immersed yourself
yeah,
is basically what you did, and that's how you learned.
that's the key.
That's the key. So, you're in Colombia, you spent, what, 3 years in Colombia, you said? 3 years?
So yeah, I was I was there for about 3 years total.
3 years. And then I'm sure when you went back to the States after having spent a lot of time there, it was probably even more shocking. More of a shock in terms of the contrast than
It
the first time.
was, and I'd gotten accepted into a fellowship program for entrepreneurs, for digital nomad entrepreneurs in Oklahoma, which, you know, what was its own experience for sure. I think legally I can't say anything bad about Oklahoma, but it was an interesting experience, and you're right, there was a lot of contrast. And actually, I'll give Tulsa this compared to California. I think that even the Midwest, in a lot of ways, is better, more sane, more reasonable. But I just, you know, no matter where I went in the U.S., I just never really felt at home.
Mm.
I never really felt. I never really felt happy, I think is the word, or
In your element,
in my
maybe?
element,
Yeah.
in my place. And it's the ironic thing here is that even though I'm halfway around the world with you out here in Mexico, speaking a different language in a different country than I was born, with a totally different culture, it feels more real, more authentic for me being here and interacting in this let's call it this part of the universe, this part of our simulation, our computer simulation that we're in here, than it does back in my home country.
So I have a question for you because my mom finds that very intriguing about you, but she thinks it's because you're European on one side. I mean, you're like European everywhere, but like on one side, you're Ukrainian, Russian, but like it's not like generations of Americans. It's like
Mhm.
you're first generation American in that regard. So you have like a closer tie to your European ancestry than maybe or culture than maybe a lot of Americans do.
Mhm.
So do you think that has something to do with it? Because my mom's like, oh, well, Europeans travel all over the place. So it's just in his blood.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. And the European side, the Jewish side, I think there's all a little bit of, you know, nomadism and exploration probably in both, um, you know, in both lines there. But perhaps that is part of it. Perhaps the fact that, you know, maybe a lot of my family hasn't been in the US for very long, right?
Neither is mine. Yeah.
It
And
makes it a little bit easier, and I think it's not even so much that it makes it easier, I think it's that I can see things a little bit more objectively because I've spent time in, a little bit of Western, but mostly Central and Eastern Europe. I've spent several months there at a time. I have a lot of friends from all over the world. I mean, I, um, I used to participate a lot in couch surfing, so and different places that I would live. So couchsurfing.com is its own, you know, community of like travelers. So I would host a lot of people from all over the world, from Ukraine, from Japan, from Germany, Finland, Russia, Mexico, Colombia, just everywhere. And I would hear different stories and learn about different things in different cultures. And that was another way, definitely, to get exposed to other parts of the world. And so I never wanted to just have this like very fixed, I guess, American mentality of everything that is to see in this world is between, you know, the Atlantic and the Pacific and the US.
that's interesting because I feel like maybe because my family hasn't been in the US as long either. My parents were both born in Cuba. So I am Latina. And I grew up in Miami, which is a very international city. Mostly Latin America, but we do have a lot of Eastern Europeans there too, actually, in sunny isles. I mean, there's everything, literally, in Miami, and I think because I grew up in such an international city where there were so many different cultures that every it was a mosaic, it was a melting pot. That for me, that was something that's really valuable. But to your point, because I'm first generation American, I think maybe that does give you kind of a I think it w well, I have this other question for you because as a first generation American whose families are immigrants, both our families fled communism.
Mm.
Yours, USSR, my family, Cuban Revolution, which
Which
basically still
arguably are the
they
same.
arguably are the same. Cuba
Yeah.
still runs like it's the fucking Soviet Union, yeah. It was the same system. Cubans just took it from the Soviets. Um did you get the story that the US is, like, the best country in the world? Because I sure as hell did, and a lot of Latinos do. And, I was interviewing one of our clients a couple days ago, and she said this interesting thing where it depends on where you are on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mhm.
That if, for example, you're from another country and you don't have very much and you're trying to establish yourself, the US and Western Europe and Canada and Australia look fantastic to
Of
you,
course.
which is the view that our parents probably had because they came from dire situations in other countries. And we want to be respectful of that. I get it. I get the mentality. I understand why that's important. But then again, right, as our client brought up the other day, and that's on my podcast, Make Money Your Honey, if you're higher up on that hierarchy of needs, the West is not looking very good for you right now.
This is true, and it's interesting because without getting super political, yet, right now there's a big divide that's happening, in fact, in all of the world, after the pandemic and just in general in the last decade, but the last 3 or 4 years have accelerated that significantly, where there's this huge divide that's becoming even more apparent between the lower and the upper class. The middle class, in a lot of ways, is actually being wiped out. In Mexico, I think it's growing,
It's growing,
which is a good
definitely.
sign of
Yeah.
economic growth.
It's a very different Mexico from, like, the ones my parents or my friend's
Yeah.
parents would come vacation in the '80s, or my brother's godfather and his wife, who are Puerto Rican and Cuban, they worked in, Mexico City, they lived there, or my best friend's mom, through her work, had to travel to Mexico all the time. So, Latinos have been coming to Mexico since forever. All kinds of Latinos. Um, but it's a very different Mexico from, like, the one my parents used to visit. It's a different Mexico from what even I saw in 2016. The growth here is wild. And I think to your point, Mexico is starting to have a very strong, professional class, which is newer for Latin America because typically in Latin America, I speak as a Latina. Typically, it's either you have a lot of money or you have no money.
And you're coming to the US
And then
to work.
and you're coming to the US to work, and now it's kind of like in the US, you're starting to see that middle class get squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, which has been going on for a while. I can tell you that as a former financial writer. And then you see countries like Mexico who are really starting to put themselves in position to have a lot of economic power in the world. Now, are they going to? We don't know. What I'm saying is, there's a lot of potential, and this is not the Mexico it was 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's very true, and to your earlier question of, did I get that story, that America was the best country in the world? Well, I don't know if I got it so much in stories as I did in actions. When my grandma on my mom's side first came to the US, they had basically minimum wage jobs. Like, my grandma worked, I think it was somewhere near, like, Chicago or that, that area over there, and they, battled harsh winters just like they did in the Soviet Union. They were basically they would take any kind of job that they could get. Um, my grandma worked at a restaurant for minimum wage. She didn't speak any English. She worked her ass off until finally, they were able to save money and save money and save money and eventually, buy houses and really create some wealth for themselves and things like that. And so
In
Uh,
one generation.
yeah.
Yeah, which is pretty impressive. My parents and grandparents did the same thing in one generation. But what's interesting is how from one generation to the next, policy, different like the value systems changed. It's not that simple
Mhm.
anymore.
That's true.
Like it was just one generation previous. And I think that's why a lot of Americans are like, this may not be the best option for us right now. So you did see it. You did see the American dream realized, right? So what
Mhm,
made you
and to a certain
to
extent,
a
yeah.
certain extent, so did I. But you still chose to live in Latin America and other countries. Let's
Here's the
talk
well,
about
there's 2 parts of it. One is they were coming, like you said, from a very different place
mm,
where they were, they had different, I guess you could call them arbitrage businesses they were from Odessa, which was part of the, which is now Ukraine, but it was part of the Soviet Union. I mean, it was always Ukraine, but it was ruled by Russia. But everybody there in that part of Ukraine spoke Russian, and also my mom's grandparents were from Russia, so we have that a couple of generations back. But it's all that kind of mentality and work hard and then doing things under the table uh,
survive.
to survive. And so coming here and being able to make the same money they were making before and go to the flea market and sell things. That's how they amassed most of their wealth. It wasn't from working. It was from just like they were doing in Ukraine. They were selling things at a profit, and that was illegal. They could have gotten jailed for that.
In Ukraine.
And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, by the USSR.
You can
So
still get jailed for that in Cuba.
yeah, yeah. So coming here and being able to actually create wealth without having to risk your life for it or your freedom, that's huge. But then the other side to it is things are not like they were 20, 30, 40 years ago
Yeah,
at all.
at all.
Things have dramatically changed. So we'll wrap up that part, and that'll be another episode about just economies and what's happened and things that have gone on in the last few decades in the U.S. to fuel this huge surge of people moving overseas, because it's huge. I think the numbers of people moving out of the U.S. are higher than they've ever been in history.
Higher than they've ever been in history. I think
We'll report back
we'll
with some
report back with the
specific
stats, but I think
stats, yeah.
I think there's various factors to that.
But we'll get into that in
Yeah,
a
we'll get
future
into that in a future
future episode.
episode. Okay, so now that you've been outside of the US for the better part of the last decade, what are like your five biggest lessons or takeaways for the audience? Either because they're already living overseas or maybe they're entrepreneurs aspiring to live overseas.
Yeah, I would say number one for sure is it's just not as difficult as you may think. So yeah, you might have to get another cell phone plan. Maybe you need to get a visa for a different country. Maybe you need to figure out how to get your bank account set up, but you can do that all in 6 weeks. It's not that complicated. Amanda's got an appointment actually just in a couple months here when she goes back to the States, over the holidays. I'm gonna head back there as well in December, but she's got an appointment to get her visa for Mexico, and we figured it out, right? For the most part, without any attorneys, without getting involved, getting too much in the weeds. It's compared to the bureaucracy and the process and the expenses of doing things immigration wise in the US,
That's a whole
because we've had experience, with our families and friends with that. It's really not that complicated. So number one is it's just you can do it. It's not as difficult as it seems. Number two is there is greener grass in a lot of ways. Number three is you can learn a language, and if you really struggle like I did, and you don't have, let's say, any experience in Spanish almost at all, you could learn another language in 12 to 18 months really, really well, like through immersion. Um, Man, five, that's a lot. That's
well,
a lot of takeaways. We're on three.
three. Okay.
Uh, what else? So yeah, learning a language.
I think I know one, right? Based
Mhm.
on conversations that we've had, that there's a difference between being a broke digital nomad and actually having a business.
That's a good one. So figure out how to actually get a business that serves you and a business that you can run from anywhere if you don't already have it, because you might think, well, no, maybe I don't really need to build a business that can be run
I'll just take
by,
odd jobs
yeah,
overseas. We're not about that life, right? On here, we've seen people be about that life, and we're like, yeah, no, no, we want like real business.
because
It's just easier.
you know, the other thing is you never really know when you may have to leave your home country.
Yeah.
And if you're reliant on income in person, and then you go and you try to compete for that same in-person income in a completely different economy, you're not going to get the same benefits that you do if you were earning in dollars or Australian, US or Australian dollars or Canadian dollars or
Or
euros,
euros, yeah.
from clients overseas. So you want to build some of those structures for sure. Uh, what else? I think everything too. Goes a little bit off of the first point, but everything is figure outable. So whether it's bringing your pets down here, bringing your family down here, figuring out the visa situation, figuring out cell phone plans, there's a solution for all of it. And I'm positive that there's someone else in your shoes with a very similar situation to you that has been able to figure these things out before. So you can absolutely do it. That's about what I have for now. If you have anything to add.
Well, I think this is actually a great place to put a pin in it because the whole reason we're starting this podcast and this community is to make it easier for other people. It was much easier for me because I had him and he helped me make the transitions, with the bank accounts, with the visa appointment, getting he made it, and I spoke Spanish, right? I speak Spanish and he still made that process a lot easier, cell phone plans, though even basic things like that. And that's part of the reason why we're starting this podcast and this community is to help entrepreneurial expats who are already living overseas. Maybe they want to go to other countries, right? And also aspiring entrepreneur expats connect
Mm.
over a common interest, but also make connections and friends in the countries that they want to go to precisely so that it doesn't seem so scary. So here's what I need you guys to do, or we need you guys to do in order to help us do that. If you liked this, go ahead and go to Apple Podcast Music, whatever it's called now, iTunes, and then leave us a 5-star review. We might be shouting you out in a future episode. It's one of the things that we want to do. Leave us a 5-star review because it helps us get it in front of more people, and you would help us with that goal of reaching all these people and connecting them together all around the world. And then in addition to that, if you're watching on YouTube, leave us a like, leave us a comment, share it out with a friend. Every single little small action that you guys take helps us get this in front of more people and build that global community. Is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, yeah, please like, comment, share, do all that stuff. Everything that tells the algorithms that you love our content. And yeah,
Also, sign up for our email list below because we have a lot of really cool things up our sleeves. We want to build a big community around this. And if you're on our email list, then you're literally the first ones to know when we have new episodes out or when we have upcoming meetups. One of the things that we're planning is some sort of like live event retreat in Mexico because so many people have been asking us about moving to Mexico. We're like, well, we could just make an event and y'all can just come check it out for yourselves. So if you're on the email list, you'll be one of the first to know.
yeah. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you very soon. Bye.